Hello, welcome back. So today is a case that I kind of thought about a while back. If you were with me for the Mary Surratt series, we talked about, like John Wilkes Booth and the theory that, like he escaped, he didn't die in that barn in Virginia and he lived out his life in Texas. So it got me thinking about the theory that Pat Garrett did not really kill Billy the Kid. Did Billy the Kid kill 21 men, as is rumored? Or was it 9? 4 of his own and 5 with help. Who was Billy the Kid and what really did happen? So, husband got me a shirt for our anniversary. And I know we're not talking about the Battle of Little Bighorn, but I just really like the shirt. History humor. Woohoo! Anyway, not the point. Billy the Kid, as we know him today, or William H. Bonney, was born Henry McCarty on November 23rd, 1859, likely in New York City. The names of his parents aren't really certain, but it is believed that his mother may have been named Catherine and his father Patrick. The family would move around and can be traced to Indiana in the late 1860s, then in Wichita, Kansas in 1870. Patrick would die around the end of the Civil War, and it would be around this time that Catherine would contract tuberculosis, then called consumption, and be told to move to a drier climate. Catherine would end up marrying a man named William Antrim on March 1st, 1873, and the family would move to Silver City, New Mexico, where William worked as a bartender and carpenter. Eventually, William would get the prospecting bug, as most people did back then, and he would ignore Catherine and his stepsons. So this would lead Catherine to take in boarders to provide for herself and her children. Even though they had moved to a drier climate, Catherine would continue to get more ill, would pass away September 16th, 1874. And upon the death of Catherine, William would then place Billy and his younger brother Joseph in different foster homes in New Mexico and leave for Arizona. Nice guy. Billy would be described as a friendly, smooth-cheeked, and blue-eyed at the age of 14 when he was forced to find work in a hotel as a dishwasher, as well as waiting tables in the restaurant. Apparently, the manager was so impressed with Billy that he would boast that he was the only kid that had ever worked for him that didn't steal anything. In school, the teachers thought that he was no more of a problem than any other boy, always quite willing to help with chores around the schoolhouse. Well, that's good. 1 year after his mother's death, September 23rd, 1875 to be exact, Billy would be arrested for hiding a bundle of stolen clothing for some random man who was playing a prank on a Chinese laundryman. Billy would be placed in jail, and 2 days later, the scrawny teenager would escape by climbing up the jailhouse chimney. This would lead to him being a fugitive. After his escape, he would end up in Arizona, where he found work at a ranch as a ranch hand and a sheep herder. By 1877, he would become a civilian teamster at Camp Grant Army Post, where he was tasked with hauling logs from a timber camp to a sawmill. It was here that a civilian blacksmith, Frank Cahill, at the camp would take joy in bullying Billy, even attacking him on August 17th after a verbal altercation, where he threw Billy to the ground. Billy would respond by drawing his pistol and shooting Cahill, who would die the following day. Billy would again be arrested and detained in the camp's guardhouse while waiting for the local marshal to arrive, but before that could happen, the slick Billy would escape once again. And so the fugitive status continues. Billy would end up at the house of a woman named High School Jones Jones in Pecos Valley, New Mexico. But this was after a group of Apache Indians stole his horse and forced him to walk many miles to the nearest settlement. Miss Jones would nurse him back to health, and then her and her family would develop a strong attachment to Billy and then give him one of their horses. Billy's still a fugitive, on the run, an outlaw, unable to find honest work, and this is where he would meet up with a man named Jesse Evans, who was the leader of a gang of rustlers called either the Boys or the Evans Gang, depending on where you're reading, apparently. As Billy really had nowhere to go, and it was then considered pretty much suicide to travel alone in that territory, which was hostile and lawless. Billy would decide to join the gang because he didn't have anything better to do. The gang committed crimes like cattle rustling and armed robbery while roaming around New Mexico. Eventually, the gang would be hired by Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, who owned Murphy and Dolan Mercantile and Banking in Lincoln County. The only member of the gang who did not side with Murphy and Dolan was Billy, choosing instead to support John Tunstall of H. Tunstall and Company. John Tunstall was an Englishman who eventually ended up in Lincoln County to become a sheep rancher. He would meet Alexander McSween, and the two would be unhappy at the influential ties with Santa Fe politicians that Murphy and Dolan had. At the time, Murphy and Dolan pretty much controlled all the trade in the county. So, to offset this, Tunstall and McSween would set up their own rival business near the Murphy and Dolan building, which would later become the Lincoln County Courthouse, and having the support of a large ranch owner by the name of John Chisholm. Murphy and Dolan would attempt to put the rival pair out of business, first by harassing them, and then Dolan would challenge Tunstall to a gunfight. But Tunstall refused to use violence. Tunstall would then recruit Billy and about half a dozen other tough cowboys to protect himself and his investments. If you think you've heard the story, you probably have. It was a movie. The Murphy-Dolan faction would obtain a court order in February of 1878 to seize some of Tunstall's horses, claiming it was for payment of an outstanding debt. Sure. Tunstall would refuse to surrender his horses for such shenanigans, and this would lead the Lincoln County Sheriff, William Brady, to form a posse to seize the horses. Tunstall would protest the presence of the posse on his land on February 18, 1878, and he would be shot and killed, and this would spark the Lincoln County War, started by the Murphy-Dolan faction because they really hated competition, apparently. Billy would be really affected by the murder of Tunstall and stated that Tunstall was one of the only men who treated him like he was a free-born and white male. During Tunstall's funeral, Billy would state, "I'll get every son of a bitch who helped kill John if it's the last thing I do." It was rumored that Tunstall had been murdered on the orders of Murphy and Dolan, which, if you think about it and their power in that area at that time, probably more true than just rumor, but that's just my opinion. The death of Tunstall would lead his former partner, Alexander McSween, to round up the men whom Tunstall had employed, including Billy, and have them legally deputized by a Justice of the Peace, John Wilson, where they became known as the Regulators. The initial purpose of the group was to serve warrants issued for the murder of Tunstall. Violence would escalate over the next 5 months, and more men would join the Regulators, and the violence would continue until September 1878, when President Rutherford B. Hayes stepped in and removed New Mexico's corrupt governor from office and appointed Lew Wallace. Wallace wanted to enact martial law. Hayes advised against it and called for peace. November 13th, 1878, Wallace would grant amnesty to those involved in the Lincoln County War so long as they weren't already under indictment, which did not extend to Billy. This would be the official end to the war, but 19 people had already been killed in the conflict, all because 2 men decided they couldn't handle a little bit of competition. So like I said, the amnesty wasn't going to be granted to Billy because he was already under several indictments not relating to the Lincoln County War. He was willing to surrender and testify against others for amnesty. By March 1879, Billy would meet with Wallace to discuss a possible deal, which meant that Billy would have to submit to a show arrest and short jail stay until he was able to testify against the others. Billy's testimony would help indict people, but John Dolan, you know where this is going, who was the district attorney, would defy Wallace's order to free Billy. Of course, Billy, being Billy, he was able to slip out of his handcuffs and once again escape. He would spend the next year around Fort Sumner and develop a friendship with Pat Garrett. Garrett would later be elected sheriff of Lincoln County and would be charged with arresting his friend. Around this time, Billy formed his own gang known as the Rustlers, and they survived by stealing, which is what Billy did to survive. Billy was still trying to convince the governor to pardon him in the fall of 1880, while still continuing his illegal activities. He would become famous in the papers and would be dubbed Billy the Kid, the most important outlaw of New Mexico. Members of Billy's gang would ride into White Oaks, New Mexico, where they would fire shots at Deputy Sheriff James Redmond before being chased out of town by the locals. Billy would not see his pardon, as on December 15, 1880, Governor Wallace placed a $500 reward, which is about $15,000 today, on Billy's head. Garrett would then pursue Billy, often setting up traps and ambushes to capture him, but Billy apparently had a sixth sense about the dangers, and Garrett would fail until he didn't. December 19th, 1880, Billy and members of his gang rode into Fort Sumner and were confronted by Garrett's posse, who had been hiding in an old hospital building. Garrett and several others would leap from cover and order the outlaws to halt, but several posse members had itchy trigger fingers and didn't wait for the gang to stop and opened fire instead, killing one man, wounding another, and wounding a horse. The surviving members escaped the ambush and would hold up in an abandoned cabin near Stinking Springs, New Mexico. Garrett's posse would track down the fugitives and surround the cabin where Billy was with Charles Beaudry, Dave Rudabaugh, Tim Pickett, and Billy Wilson. It was when Beaudry crossed the front of an open window and was shot that the siege would rage until the next day, when Rudabaugh waved a white flag and the remaining men would surrender on December 23, 1880. For Billy, he was first to be taken to jail in Las Vegas, New Mexico, then Santa Fe, and finally Mesilla. In April of 1881, Billy would be convicted of murdering Sheriff William Brady and sentenced to hang on May 13th. Billy would be sent back to Lincoln to await execution under guard of James Bell and Robert Olinger on the top floor of the Lincoln County Courthouse. You all know what's coming. April 28th, Billy would escape. He killed both guards while Garrett was out of town. It's believed that a friend or a regulator sympathizer left a pistol in a restroom that one of the guards would escort Billy to each day. So Billy would use that pistol to kill James Bell, and then proceeded to steal Olinger's 10-gauge double-barrel shotgun, where he would then wait by the window of the room where he was being held for Olinger to appear, which he did after hearing shots. So once he was directly under the window, he heard Billy say, "Hello, Bob." Olinger would look up to see his own gun pointed at him before Billy fired a shot that killed him instantly. Billy's luck did finally run out after that last escape. Turns out, Garrett was questioning Billy's friend Peter Maxwell on July 14, 1881, in a darkened bedroom at Old Fort Sumner, and Billy happened to enter the room. Due to the poor lighting conditions, Billy didn't recognize Garrett and asked in Spanish, "¿Quién And Garrett would respond, not with words, but with 2 shots from his revolver, the first hitting Billy in the heart. What's interesting to note is that Billy never made his living robbing banks, trains, or even stagecoaches. He rustled cattle. Maybe he stole an occasional horse, but robbery didn't seem to be his thing. He was described as easygoing and not afraid to draw when provoked. And in the span of 4 years, 1877 to 1881, it is believed that he was involved in the shooting deaths of 9 men, 4 of whom he killed alone. One of those is a legendary story that happened in January of 1880 at a saloon in New Mexico, when a drunk man by the name of Joe Grant was busy threatening patrons that he would kill someone before the night was done. Billy approached the man and complimented his pistol. Take it from Grant's holster, spin the cylinders so that the next shot would be an empty chamber, and then put it back in its holster and walk away. It would be later in the evening when Grant would pull his gun and try to shoot Billy in the back. But his gun didn't fire, and this allowed Billy to pull his own pistol and shoot Grant dead. Garrett would become a legend in the Old West for killing Billy, but as the years rolled on, there would be rumors that Garrett had either shot the wrong man or he helped fake Billy's death. An elderly Texas man known as Brushy Bill Roberts would come forward in the late 1940s claiming to be Billy the Kid, which would serve as a great story for the movie Young Guns 2. Robert's story was discredited after records show that he was born in 1879, some 20 years after Billy's year of birth. Even more bizarre, though, some investigators have a theory that Billy lived to be an old man using the alias John Miller. In 2005, the alleged remains of Miller were exhumed, but plans to compare DNA to that of Billy's from the blood on the floor in the room where he died. The results were deemed useless. That said, historical records say that Billy's body was positively identified by several people the day after the shooting, leading to the conclusion that it was, in fact, Sheriff Pat Garrett, one-time friend to Billy, who killed him. So, what do you think? Was Pat Garrett responsible for the death of Billy the Kid? Did he help Billy fake his death and then Billy went on to live out a life as either Brushy Bill Roberts or John Miller? Let me know down in the comments. I mean, I remember seeing Young Guns 2 and going, wait a minute, is it possible? Well, I don't know. He would have been really, really old. And if Brushy Bill was born 20 years after the year that they're saying Billy the Kid was born, then maybe that's not probable. But, maybe the John Miller one is. Or maybe Pat Garrett did really kill his one-time friend. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, your theories down in the comments. And while you're down there, don't forget to give a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.